and welcome to my channel. Today is the last day of April, so it's that time of month to go over the books I've read over the past few weeks. I do a mid-month wrap-up as well, so it's about like every 2 weeks I do a wrap-up. This one, however, isn't very big. I was only able to read 4 books because I ended up taking on a really thick book that took me a week to read, and then after that I kind of read a book I wasn't the most interested in, I guess, and it kind of took away my motivation to read a bit, and it took me way longer than it should have to finish, so I just have 4. The first book I no longer have in my possession as I've returned it to the library, but that is Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. This is a psychological / religious horror. Was published in 2019 and I rated it a 5 out of 5. I have a really long reading vlog that explains all about this book and how it completely messed me up. And I'll have that, is it on this side or this side? I can never remember. On one of these sides. I'll have a link to that. So if you'd like a more in-depth discussion on how I feel about this book, feel free to watch that video. So Imaginary Friend is over 700 pages, has like 135 chapters and 7 parts to it. Trying to come up with a summary for this book is really odd because it kind of changes course so many times, and obviously you don't want to say anything that could potentially spoil the story. So I'm gonna try my best. Essentially this book is about a 7-year-old kid named Christopher and his mother. They escape an abusive relationship to a small town in Pennsylvania. In the first freaking week they're there, Christopher gets lost in the local woods for 6 days, and he just kind of walks out of the woods one day and he has no idea what happened. He has no memory at all. He just knows that some nice man led him out of the forest. However, Christopher comes back changed. He's pretty much a genius for his age now. He knows everything, it seems, and his mother even recognizes like this isn't right. However, Christopher has also been given a mission by this unknown nice man to build a treehouse in the woods before Christmas Day, or something bad is going to happen to the town. This treehouse, however, is only the very top of the deep, deep rabbit hole that this story goes down, as the line between reality and imagination gets really thin. So I kind of put off reading this book for a while. I was really intimidated by the length of it, and I was afraid of it being really slow, and that wasn't what I was in the mood for, but this book gets right into it. It starts 50 years in the past because it has to kind of show you this previous incident that happened before it gets into modern day, and it is just perfect. It jumps right into the action, and you think it's going one way, it goes another. It feels like it's coming up until the end, but then there's 400 pages left and you're like, what the hell? However, I had heard this was religious horror before I read it, but I did end up thinking through my reading vlog experience that I was mistaken, because literally for the first half of the book, there really is nothing to do with religion. There are a few religious characters, but it's nothing that like you haven't seen in a book before. But once those religious aspects do come into play, it goes right in, and it just kind of builds up in the ridiculousness and the craziness of it until the climax at the very end. And I'm really happy to say that this book really didn't slow down until the last 100 pages. I think it could have ended around page 600 instead of around page 700 just fine. It does get to the point of ridiculousness where it's kind of laughable at times, but it didn't bother me too much, and I was actually okay with the ending. I didn't completely hate it or anything like that, which tends to be the case if you've watched me for a while. And when I was rating this book, I was wondering if I should rate it lower than a 5 based on the based on the few problems I do have with it, but my enjoyment of it was just so high. And if you've seen my reading vlog, you'll know what I mean. I just am kind of going crazy the whole time and just exclaiming. And yeah, it's a good book. If you enjoy horror, I definitely recommend picking it up. It has a lot of nods to Stephen King as well. And just be aware, you have to be okay with religious horror, otherwise I don't think you would enjoy this at all. So this next book I actually started in the middle of another book I read because I was just kind of not feeling like picking it up. So I read another book instead, and that is Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford. This came out in 2020, is a fantasy / horror novel, and I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5. That cover is really pretty though, isn't it? So this is a pretty small book, so I just read this in one sitting. It definitely has straight up witchy vibes, so if you're into that, I would definitely recommend this. Essentially, it follows this girl named Ada and her father. They live kind of on the outskirts of town, and they are not human. They were essentially grown from the ground, and they have the power to heal the physical illness of the villagers, so they are often visited to cure their ailments. However, there is one gentleman that takes an interest in Ada, and it leads to conflict between her and her father that might change the lives of everyone. So I'm really interested in the universe this is in, just because the concept of them being like born from the ground, and they don't age like normal humans either. They age very slowly. So for example, Ada's dad has been around for generations of families in the village, and I'm just really intrigued by that. So I hope this author writes more stories that take place in this universe and with people like Ada and her father. This is a story that's written quite beautifully. However, I did run into a few situations where I'd have to read a paragraph a few times to really understand the meaning and what was happening. So it can be kind of confusing at times, and there are still a few things that I don't really quite understand, just because some of the language that is used, it could mean like one thing or another. One thing I did think this book did really well is it made the whole situation seem pretty innocent in the beginning, and then as you go throughout the book, you learn more and more about the people, appearances, and people's pasts that really paint the picture differently. So this one really ended up being kind of like a bizarre but interesting read for me. And content warning, this does have implied incest and pedophilia. So please be aware of that going into this. This next book definitely didn't end up being what I thought it was going to be, and that is Go the Distance by Jen Kalanita. This just came out on April 6th of 2021, so I actually bought this as a new release. And this is a YA retelling of Hercules. It actually starts at the very end of the Hercules movie. Like the first few chapters is basically like a little snippet of what happens there at the ending when Meg and Hercules are taken up to Mount Olympus and Hercules becomes a god. However, the whole concept of this book, as you can see on the front there, is what if Meg had to become a Greek god? So that is essentially what this whole story is based around. Meg has to go on a quest of her own to try and become a god to join Hercules at Mount Olympus. And the premise sounds interesting, and based on the cover, it seems like Hades would be an integral part of the story, right? Well, that's not the case. So I didn't really read the description or anything. I ended up buddy reading this with a friend, and we both love like Greek mythology and stories with Hades and stuff like that. So we were both kind of expecting a bit of a different story than what we got going into this. So this is marketed as a YA, but unfortunately it definitely reads more toward middle grade. Just the writing was pretty pretty bland. And one of my major issues with this is that all of the characters acted OOC, or out of character, especially Meg. Reading this, I could never hear her voice at all. Hercules was probably the closest to being as he was in the movie, but everyone else, it just had no soul, I guess. It was very just, I'm going to tell you what's happening instead of showing you, and just how the characters interacted and reacted and the decisions they made, it was just like, no, they wouldn't do that. Like, they're not going to be that stupid. And the way the story is set up is they really kind of show us Meg's past, which I do appreciate, but they set up Meg's past to be convenient for her quest. And so there are things that are brought up that end up helping her complete certain tasks, and it's just kind of like, oh, of course, like she knows this particular thing for this particular situation, and that happens to be what she has to do. So that was kind of like, eh. And however, I did like the message that this book is putting forth. Like, that's not bad. It just, so I like what it was trying to do. It just didn't really get there. And unfortunately, this is the first of Disney's Twisted Tales that I have read, and so I'm kind of iffy on trying some other ones. However, they are done by different authors, so I just think I might skip the ones that are by this person and pick up some of the others. Like, I've heard that Mulan is geared toward an older audience, so that might be one for me to pick up next to try. Lastly, I have this funny little book called An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good by Helen Turstyn, yes. This came out in 2018 and is a little short story collection, and it's based on humor. Now, this was originally written in Swedish, and it was translated into English for this book. So the short stories themselves were written over like a span of 11 years, and there's only 5 of them. So like, this is a really tiny book, but it's really cute. And I originally picked it up because I was thinking maybe I will read this out loud to my grandma. And I think there's like 1 or 2 stories in here I actually will try to do that with. Oh, party. Oh. So the first story is actually my least favorite out of all of them. It's called An Elderly Lady Has Accommodation Problems and was written in 2012. And I gave this one a 2 out of 5. I see why it's the first story, because this is where we learn the most information about the main character, Maud. This whole collection is essentially about an 88-year-old woman who murders people. So someone dies in each story. This first story was a bit on the strange side, but we learn a lot about Maud's past, and I think it's the one where we learn the most information about her. It was definitely the least interesting for me out of the bunch. The next story is my favorite one. It's called An Elderly Lady in Her Travels. It was also written in 2012, and I gave it a 4 out of 5. Maud has some quirks in this one that actually remind me of my own grandma, and I think this is the one that I would probably read to her if I choose to do so. It's also the most believable. Like, I could actually see someone doing this and this happening, so I thought that was kind of amusing. The third one was written in 2007, and it's called An Elderly Lady Seeks Peace at Christmas Time. Now, this is one where I was really rooting for Maud and her little murder spree. I gave it a 3 out of 5. I think it's probably the shortest one, but it's one of the more satisfying ones, just because you're like, yeah, you should have killed this person sooner, like, of course. Next is the only one that isn't told from Maud's point of view, but she's still an integral character in it, and it takes place in her apartment. It's called The Antique Dealer's Death, and was written in 2016. This one I gave a 4 out of 5. The last few pages of the story are my favorite of it. It's pretty amusing, and it's just kind of like, oh, people see what you're doing. Then this last story is called An Elderly Lady is Faced with a Difficult Dilemma, and is the newest one, being written in 2018. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 as well, as it's essentially, it's essentially the previous story, but told from Maud's point of view, so we end up with the whole picture. And is it realistic? Hell no, but it is very entertaining. So I would recommend this to anyone who just kind of wants a quick laugh, and I just find it amusing. The genre on it is mystery, but there's really no mystery to it. So I pretty much just find this a straight up like humor or just fiction, but I think it's cute. I love the cover. I enjoyed most of the stories. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars overall. I just really wasn't into that first one, but I'm looking forward to showing this to my grandma. And that's all! Like I said, I didn't really get to read much these past few weeks, but that's okay. And coming up next weekend, we're kind of going on a little trip to the countryside with some people for a birthday. So I'm gonna try and film a reading vlog for that. But that trip lasts like 4-ish days, so not sure how much reading I'll actually get done. But other than that, thank you for hanging out with me. It is always appreciated. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, as that does help me out a lot. And until next time, bonne journée and au revoir.